Chapter 12. The Council Decides. Of the moment following, while we rushed thus down to death, flung into a corner of the pilot room by the ship splitting, I remember most clearly the rush of cold air that shrieked through our falling half. Had our ship broken in empty space instead of in the air of that great world's atmosphere, we would have met instant annihilation. Since even the gaseous Andromedans, as I was later to find, could not live save in air like ourselves, their gaseous bodies disintegrating in any other element. For the moment, though, as we flashed down toward the surface of the world beneath, it seemed that death for us had been delayed but a moment. We were whirled crazily around as our wrecked half of the ship fell, and through the window I had a glimpse of the ground beneath, rushing up to meet us with appalling speed. I tensed for the crash and for death as it leapt up toward us, nearer. Nearer. There was a hoarse cry from Din, and I glimpsed in the next instant a dark, great shape that swooped down past and beneath us from above. The next instant, just as I waited for the annihilating impact with the ground, there was a slight jar, a clang of metal against metal from beneath, and then swiftly, miraculously, our wild fall was slackening. In another moment, the ground was just beneath us, and smoothly and slowly we sank downward, coming to rest upon it without a jar. I staggered up to the window, gazing forth, stunned by that sudden escape from inescapable annihilation, and then saw the explanation of it. Our half of the wrecked ship was resting upon the back of one of the great, flat Andromedan ships that had flashed down under it and caught it upon itself, bearing us down to the ground and saving us from the crash and from death. A moment more and we were stumbling out of the pilot room, down to the ground from the Andromedan ship on which we rested. As we reached it, I saw that the other falling half of our ship had been saved in the same way by another Andromedan craft. Lying close beside us on that craft, with the members of our crew in it, pouring out to join us. Another instant and they stood with us, a vast mass of the gliding, gaseous Andromedans that swarmed on this world's surface having collected about us. A strange, silent horde that I knew were contemplating us with their alien sense of sight. Quickly toward us, though, came the half-dozen Andromedans who had been with us in the ship and had escaped with us, leading us now through the throngs of gaseous figures about us towards some destination of their own. As we moved along with them, though, our interest was not so much in our destination as in the stupendous and unparalleled scene about us. Far away to the distant horizons stretched the smooth surface of this great world, covered with an even growth of jet-black sod that gave it an extraordinarily park-like appearance, with here and there tall, spiked growths or plants of the same ebon black. That blackness, as I guessed, was due to the perpetual, fierce light of the great ring of suns that belted the firmament overhead, the circle of suns at whose center this mighty planet hung, and whose ceaseless light would naturally give to this world's vegetation a pigmentation of deepest black. The belt of giant suns above, the countless swarms of Andromedans about us, like gliding pillars of misty green gas, the ebon vegetation, the masses of mighty ships that rose and descended ceaselessly in the broad areas set aside for them. All these held us silent with the silence of awe, as with our guides we moved on. It was none of these things, though, wonderful as they were, that intrigued me most of all about us. It was the total absence of buildings, of visible structures or habitations on all the surface of this world. The smooth black sod, the countless Andromedan throngs, the departing and arriving ships, these were all that were visible about us, all except a great number of round, well-like shafts that opened in the ground everywhere about us. These shafts were some 6 feet across and were placed always in pairs or groups of 2, and as I gave them more attention, I saw in a moment that they held the answer to the absence of all buildings about us. For into them and out of them, the gaseous Andromedans were moving in ceaseless streams, moving straight into one empty shaft and sinking smoothly downward out of sight, upheld by some force at the shaft's bottom beneath that nullified gravity, just enough to make it possible for them to float gently down. From the other shaft of the pair, two other Andromedans would be rising smoothly upward through the air, reaching the surface and gliding away, that other ascending shaft having at its bottom a constant force sufficient not only to nullify completely the pull of gravity, but to give all in the shaft a slight upward thrust. Into these shafts, as we moved past them, I glanced down and saw that far beneath they opened into brilliant lit rooms and halls, some of great size. I understood then how they had come to be used, how the Andromedans, their vast hordes cramped upon the surface of their worlds, had removed all buildings from the surface and had sunk them deep in the ground itself. Subterranean buildings that could be entered or left by the ascending and descending shafts. And that gave them all the surface of their worlds free for their ships and to move about on. In and out of the great buildings, sunken in the ground beneath us, were moving constant streams of Andromedans up and down the shafts. And now we saw that before us lay a pair of such shafts, much greater in size than all others we had seen, and the center of a great rush of traffic of the gaseous beings about us. It was toward these greater shafts that our Andromedan companions were leading us, the figures before us giving way as we approached. A moment more and we stood at the edge of the descending shaft, the Andromedans beside us motioning toward it and moving over its edge, sinking smoothly downward. Hesitatingly I followed, stepped from the edge into the empty air of the shaft. But the next moment my fear left me, for instead of plunging down a dead weight, I and my companions who had followed me were sinking downward as gently as though gripped and upheld by unseen hands. Down we floated, through the great shaft bright lit by the belted suns above, down until we were sinking down out of the shaft itself into a vast, white-lit hall that stretched away for a great distance in all directions from us, and down from the center of whose ceiling, where the two great shafts opened from above, we were sinking. Smoothly we sank downward from the great hall's ceiling to its floor, landing upon a great disc inset in that floor beneath the descending shaft, and glowing with dark purple light, the glowing force that combated gravitation enough in the shaft above it to allow us to float gently down. For the moment, though, I paid not so much attention to it as to the strange, vast hall in which we now stood. Colossal in size and circular of shape, the mighty white-lit room was as large or larger even than the great council hall of the Federated Suns in our own universe, though it was far different in appearance. There were in it no ranks of seats, the smooth floor being divided by crossing black lines into thousands of squares of equal size, and in each of those squares there rested motionless one of the gaseous Andromedans, thousands upon thousands of them, like massed columns of thick green vapor, being grouped in the great room about us. We stood ourselves on a section of the floor at the room's very center, raised a few feet above the rest of the floor, and except for the two purple glowing discs beneath the ascension and descension shafts, the only object upon this raised portion was a great globe of what seemed misty glass, exactly like the tiny one with which the Andromedans had first communicated with us, but of vastly greater size, being some dozen feet in diameter. Toward this, as we hesitated there at the center of that gigantic assemblage of strange silent figures, there moved the leader of the Andromedans who had accompanied us. He grasped with his two gaseous arms the metal studs that projected out from the great globe's base, and at once the misty sphere glowed with inward light, while in it appeared the 1,000 Andromedan ships, flashing out into the void, rescuing us from the Serpent Fleet and bringing us back into their own universe, a swift succession of explanatory scenes. This explanation completed, the Andromedan moved back from the great sphere and motioned me toward it. Slowly I stepped forward, sensing the gaze of the massed, silent thousands on me. I knew that it was the supreme moment of our mission, the moment for which we had battled our way through 3 universes, the chance to obtain from this great council of the Andromedans the help that might save our universe. I glanced back to the anxious faces of my friends, drew a long breath, and then grasped the 2 studs before me, concentrating all my thoughts on what I wished to express. As the big sphere above glowed with inward light again, the thrilling current from it rushing into my brain. In the glowing globe now appeared our universe, a great galaxy of stars floating in space like their own. Swiftly, with shifting thoughts, I showed them its throngs of peopled worlds, the traffic that swept between its suns, the ordered life of its teeming, dissimilar races. Then, as my thoughts shifted again, they saw the first 5,000 serpent ships rushing in upon that galaxy, destroying all our fleet and settling upon the suns and worlds of the Cancer cluster, saw us fleeing inward and then turning to capture one of the serpent ships by boarding it in mid-space. Then, briefly, the globe flashed forth the interior of our own great council hall, with our council chief exhibiting and explaining the records of the serpent people, which we had captured in their ship. In a swift flash, I explained the meaning of those records, a flash that showed the serpent people, masters of the suns and worlds of our own universe, sailing out with increased powers to attack the Andromeda universe. And as that flashing scene showed in the great globe, I saw a silent stir of excitement run through the massed thousands about me. In another moment, though, the globe's scene had shifted back to the council hall, with ourselves receiving our orders from the council chief, entering our captured serpent ship and slanting up and outward, bursting past the patrolling serpent ships, through the void of outer space, only to be captured by the other serpent ships that had come out to meet us. Our flight then to the serpent universe, our glimpse of the vast serpent fleet being built, and the colossal death beam cone, and the escape of Juldine appeared in swift succession. Then came our own strange captivity, our rescue by Juldine, and escape outward from the serpent universe through the great space forts, and our pursuit and final rescue by the 1,000 Andromedan ships. Then, as our final plea, I showed the vast hordes of serpent ships and their irresistible mighty death beam cones sailing out from the dying universe toward our own, rushing upon our galaxy and wiping out all its races. The great globe then went dark as I released my hold upon its studs and stepped back from it. Our mission was ended, and its success or failure lay in the hands of the massed Andromedans about us. There was a moment of stillness, a moment in which I knew the fate of our universe and of all in it was being decided, a moment in which the silence of the mighty hall seemed thunderous to our strained nerves. Then I saw each of the thousands of Andromedans in the hall reach down toward two smaller metal studs that projected from the floor before each, and as the great globe beside me glowed again with light, I sensed quickly that upon it would be registered the decision of the majority of the Great Council about me, the method used by them in reaching and registering a decision. Tensely, we watched the great glowing globe, and then in it appeared another scene. It was a scene of countless ships, gleaming flat Andromedan ships, gathering from all the suns and worlds of their universe, upon the giant central world where we were now. Tens of thousands of great ships that rose from that world, slanting up and outward. Among them were 100 ships quite different from the rest, great hemispheres of gleaming metal that rose as smoothly and swiftly as the rest, dome side uppermost. And as though in explanation, there flashed in the globe a swift picture of those same 100 domed craft hanging above great suns in the Andromeda universe, projecting down beside and around them great walls and sheaths of the dark purple glowing force that neutralized gravity, so that those suns, screened from the pull of the suns on their right by a great wall of that glowing purple force, would move away to the left in answer to the pull of the suns there, or vice versa. These, I realized swiftly, were the great sun-swinging ships by means of which the Andromedans had placed their suns in ordered circles. And now in the globe, with all the tens of thousands of ordinary flat Andromedan ships, they were flashing out into space. Then came a brief scene of the whole vast Andromedan fleet flashing down out of space upon the dying universe, bursting through the opening in the great blue force wall around it and attacking all the serpent creatures, suns and worlds. The next instant, the globe had gone dark again, but I knew now what the decision of the council was, and I whirled around to my friends with excitement flaming up in me. "They're going to help us," I cried. "They're going to mass all their great fleet, and with it, and their sun-swinging ships, sail to attack the serpent universe." I cannot remember now the moments that followed that momentous decision. So overwhelming to us then was the consciousness that we had succeeded in our mission, had dared the awful void and the perils of 3 universes and had procured the help that might save our galaxy. I remember being led by our Andromedan guides into and through other rooms off the Great Hall. Of the thousands of gaseous figures of the Council crowding up the shaft toward the surface above, to speed to every quarter of their universe and summon all their fighting ships. Of Juldeen noisy with exultation, and Koros Khan quiet as ever, but with gleaming eyes. Then all about me seemed dissolving and darkening as the utter fatigue of our strenuous last hours overcame me. A fatigue through which only my knowledge of our mission's importance had so far borne me, and beneath which now I sank into dreamless sleep. When I awoke, I sensed that hours had passed, though Juldeen and our followers lay still unconscious about me. Leaving them there, I strode out of the room and into the great council hall, whose stupendous circle lay empty now and bare, seeming immeasurably more vast in its white-lit emptiness than when filled with the thousands of gaseous Andromedans. I moved across it to the raised section at the center, stepped upon the purple glowing disc beneath the ascending shaft, and then, thrust upward by the force of that disc, was moving smoothly toward the round opening in that ceiling and on up the shaft until I had burst out into the unceasing light of the belt of suns above, stepping sidewise onto the ground as I did so. And now I saw that Koros Khan, not a dozen feet away, had turned and was coming toward me. "Their ships are gathering, Dur Nal," he exclaimed, eyes alight. "You've slept for nearly a day there below, and their ships have been coming in those hours from every sun and world in their universe." I swept my gaze about, a certain awe filling me, as I saw now the tremendous forces that had gathered and were gathering here on the surface of this giant central world. A tremendous circular area of miles in diameter around us, around the shafts that led down to the hall of the council, had been cleared of all else and was now a single vast gathering point for the thousands of ships that were massing here. Even while we gazed, the air above was being darkened by the swarms of those ships that shot ceaselessly downward, landing in this great circular area, drawing up in regular rows and masses. In tens of thousands they were grouped about us, a tremendous plain of gleaming metal ships that stretched as far as the eye could reach. At the center of this vast plain of ships, though, there lay a round clearing in which we ourselves stood, a clearing in which there rested only 100 other ships, different far from the thousands around them, 100 domed, gleaming craft like giant hemispheres of metal. Not 1,000 feet from us lay these great, strange craft, their space doors open and their Andromedan crews busy among the masses of strange mechanisms inside, and I recognized them instantly as the great craft I had seen in the thought pictures in the council hall below, the mighty ships whose projected sheaths and walls of dark purple force could move giant suns at will. "The sun-swinging ships," I exclaimed, and Koros Khan nodded, his eyes upon them also. "Yes," he said, "they'll be the most powerful weapons of the whole great fleet. With them we can crash the suns and worlds of the serpent-universe together at will." Now, though, we turned our attention from them to the tens of thousands of ships that lay about us. In and out of those ships, too, were moving countless masses of Andromedans, swift-gliding gaseous figures, who were inspecting and testing the mechanisms of their craft and the cylinders in their sides that shot forth the crumpling shafts of force. They were making all ready for our start, we knew, for the battle that must ensue when we poured down on the serpent-universe, and we strode over toward them. Already we had learned that the controls and mechanisms of the Andromedan ships were much like those of the serpent ships, their speed being fully as great, but some features of them were still strange to me. A dozen steps only we took toward them, though, and then stopped short. For down out of the sunlight above was slanting toward us a close-massed swarm of ships that seemed different from the masses of ships that were landing ceaselessly about us, that moved more slowly, more deliberately. Down it came while we watched it, standing there, seeing it change from a far swarm of black dots in the sunlight above to a mass of long, dark shapes that were becoming clearer to our eyes each moment. Shapes that, I saw with a sudden great leap of my heart, were not long and flat, but oval. "They're serpent ships." Chorus Khan's great cry stabbed like a sword blade of sound toward me. "They're the serpent ships that pursued us to this universe, the 300 that escaped when we were rescued. They've seen this great fleet gathering and have come to strike a blow at it. Serpent ships." My mind was racing with superhuman speed in that instant as they drove down toward us, and I saw that the Antarian was right, that these were the 300 that had escaped when we were rescued by the Andromedans, and that we thought had fled back to their own universe. Instead, they had turned and followed us, knowing that we meant to gather forces to attack their universe, had flashed into the Andromeda universe toward this central world, unseen among the swarms of other ships that were gathering here, and now were swooping down with their score of great disk attraction ships lowermost, driving down toward us in a fierce, reckless attack. In a single instant, it all flashed plain in my mind, and then Chorus Khan and I had whirled around, and he was racing back toward the 100-domed, sun-swinging ships behind us. "I'll warn these 100 ships," he yelled, as I turned to and raced toward the nearest of the thousands of fighting ships about us. Even as I ran toward those thousands of ships, though, their Andromedan crews still unaware of their peril, I saw the massed serpent ships above, slanting straight down toward the 100-domed craft behind me, their attraction ships hanging motionless above those craft for a moment. I had reached the Andromedan fighting ships now, and as the crews of the nearest glided forth to meet me, I cried out, pointing upward. They saw the serpent ships swooping down from above, and then were throwing themselves into their own ships. I raced into one with them, up to the pilot room set near the stem on its long, flat upper surface. The Andromedans beside me flung back the controls then, and our ship and the ships about us were leaping up like light toward the down-rushing serpent ships. At the same moment, I saw Chorus Khan racing into one of the domed, sun-swinging ships above which hovered the score of attraction ships. Saw the doors of those domed ships clanging shut as they prepared to escape from the menace above, since they could project their mighty purple force downward only, and would thus be helpless if caught in the attraction grip of the disk ships above. A moment more in those 100-domed craft, the most powerful weapon of the great Andromedan fleet, would be safe, I knew. But in that moment, as the 300 serpent fighting ships dashed down toward us, I saw the score of hovering attraction ships glow suddenly with flickering light. The 100 sun-swinging ships beneath were pulled smoothly upward by that tremendous attractive force. And then the attraction ships, grasping the 100-domed craft that were the heart of our fleet, were racing straight up and outward into space.